and welcome to Loaves to Legends, your new favourite history podcast brought to you by the Sandwich Guildhall Museum. I am your host, Gia, and I'm here with the rest of our lovely Loaves to Legends team to entertain, educate, and indulge you in all things big and small related to our gorgeous town of Sandwich. Shortly, I'll be joined by our second host of today, Bertie, to give you today's episode. But before we get into that, I want to encourage all of you wonderful people to not just listen, but to get involved too. One of the things we want to emphasize on Loaves to Legends is that this podcast is your podcast as much as it is ours. We have a wonderful online community, and you can chat to other history-loving fans on our Discord, or you can email us any facts or feedbacks at loavestolegends@gmail.com. The link to both the Discord and email are in the episode description. Let's get into this. Hi, I'm Gia, and
I am Bertie.
Welcome, Bertie. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. So, for you listeners, Bertie is a collections volunteer here at the Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Bertie's actually involved in quite a few of our episodes. A little behind the scenes, we have actually recorded the other episodes that Bertie's been involved in prior to this. So, for us, this is a bit weird. I'm introducing Bertie, having already done a bunch of stuff with him, but that's a little behind the scenes extra for you guys. So yes, Bertie's a collections volunteer, and he is a fantastic addition to this podcast, I must say. So thank you for joining in this episode.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. Let's go.
Right, let's get straight into this episode. As our volunteer museum assistants will tell you, one of the questions that they get asked a lot is, what's the connection between the town of Sandwich and the food? So today, we're talking all about Sandwich. That's the food, the place, the person, and whatever else we uncover. So grab a snack. This episode might make you hungry. And let's begin. Interestingly, it wasn't until I went off to uni in a different county that I first actually heard the myth surrounding the name of our town. And it was from someone else telling me about my own hometown.
That is quite interesting. You would have thought you'd have heard someone else mention it here, but no.
Exactly. I felt like a bit of a history buff failure, having someone who lived elsewhere educating me on my own local history. But I can gladly say that I do now know a lot more about our town, which is, it's quite good considering this podcast. Anyway, so the myth surrounding the town Sandwich goes like this. The 4th Earl of Sandwich was an avid gambler. Whilst playing cards, the Earl was hungry, but didn't want to stop playing, and he didn't want to get his hands messy as he did so. So what he did is he got a slice of bread, a bit of meat, and another slice of bread. He put the meat in between the 2 bits of bread so he could eat his meal without getting his hands messy, and so he could still continue playing cards. And such, the sandwich was born. The Earl of Sandwich made the sandwich, and everybody else who was at the gambling table looked at him and thought, that's a really cool idea, and copied him, and so it caught on. And that is the story behind how the sandwich came to be. What do you think about that, Bertie?
It's very interesting, but it is also very convenient because, obviously now you think about it as being such a staple food, but also the idea of it's not that complex, having 2 pieces of bread with stuff in the middle. Also considering how long bread has been such a staple food in pretty much every culture. It's quite difficult to believe he was the first person to think it up.
As you know, people of Sandwich, we want to believe in this. It's a great myth, but how much truth is there behind it?
Now, if we're delving into the history of the word sandwich, encompassing the person, the place, and the food, it's kind of a case asking which one came first. We know that it wasn't the Earl of Sandwich, the first one, or the 4th one, because they were named after this small but mighty town. So between the food and the place, let's first focus on Sandwich, the town. Sandwich is a small town, and it was once very mighty. I'm going to ask you to picture a scene. A quaint town, complete with cobbled streets, medieval and Tudor buildings, as well as 3 churches, and of course, the Guildhall. In his book, The Cinque Ports, published in 1900, Ford Madox describes Sandwich as a shining little town, referring to the gleaming little river, the flagged marshes, the sweep of the sky. If you visit, you will see the River Stour meandering by, just wide enough for two small boats to pass each other. You might even use the small bridge to cross the river and walk the few miles it takes to arrive on the shores at Sandwich Bay. Now picture that town, but fill the streets with people and animals, turn the gentle River Stour into a great body of water with no land to be seen on the other side. Instead, the horizon is studded with ships, some at the beginning of their journey and others at the end. This was Sandwich during the Middle Ages.
Before you go on, I wanted to quickly explain how Sandwich became this way. So for those who don't know, Sandwich is in the southeast of England. More people probably heard of Canterbury and Dover, and Sandwich is situated sort of somewhere in between those two places. Sandwich is now part of Dover district, and it's near an area called Thanet. Thanet is slightly more north than Sandwich, and encompasses towns such as Margate, Ramsgate, and Broadstairs. Thanet, though, is sometimes known as the Isle of Thanet. This is because it actually once was an island. It was separated from the mainland by a large body of water, which Bertie mentioned. That body of water was, at its largest, a few miles wide, and it was known as the Watson Channel. Now some history here. In AD 43, the Emperor Claudius ordered the invasion of Britain, and his men landed at Richborough, 2 miles from where Bertie and I are recording this today, here at the Sandwich Guildhall Museum. When the Romans withdrew many years later, materials from the fort were taken to build an emerging town close by. The Romans had departed, leaving the coastline threatened by settlers from elsewhere, and so Edward the Confessor established distinct ports. These are the 5 head ports, including Sandwich, and they were given privileges in exchange for providing coastal protection and transport for the crown. In its prime, the Watson Channel was used for a multitude of purposes. Ships carried limestone to build cathedrals in Canterbury. The Vikings also used it to access the city, although for slightly different reasons. It was used to transport goods like wines and spices, and armies from Britain used it to make their ways to other countries. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, though, the channel began to silt up, and by the 17th century, it was unusable for ships and boats. It could no longer be the port that it once was. Despite this, though, Sandwich has been home to some very significant events in history. Too many to name now in this section of a podcast episode, so I'm going to name just a few for you, Bertie and listeners. In 1217, the British were successful against the French in the Battle of Sandwich, convincing Prince Louis to abandon his efforts to conquer Britain. In 1561, Queen Elizabeth I granted permission for the Huguenots to settle in Sandwich. They brought new skills which helped the town flourish again. In 1607, and I like this fact, in 1607 a baby called Mary Chilton was baptised in Sandwich. When she was 13, her family boarded a boat to head for the New World. After a perilous journey, the boat arrived, and Mary excitedly ran ahead, becoming the first woman to set foot on Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. That to me is incredible, that the first woman who set foot on Plymouth Rock was baptised from here in Sandwich. That's incredible. And another fact here, in 1939, with a war on the horizon, 4,000 Jewish refugees were rescued and taken to Richborough to live and work at the Kitchener camp. As it was just over the toll bridge from the town, the refugees would often visit Sandwich in their free time, and although this caused Sandwich population to double, they were welcomed by the townsfolk. And all you listeners at home who've listened to all of our episodes will recognise the Kitchener camp, because we spoke about this in our very first episode, our special episode, what us at Legends team like to call episode 0, where I did an interview with Claire Feisenberg, who created an amazing exhibition on the Kitchener camp. So definitely, if you haven't already, go listen to the episode. We go into fantastic detail about this. It is an incredibly important part of our history and definitely needs to be spoken about more often, I think. Now, that's just a few events that Sandwich has seen over the years. The point I'm trying to make here for Bertie and you listeners is that Sandwich was an important town. Towards the end of the 17th century, the Watson Channel began to silt up and gradually became unusable, and we lost our importance of a town. We no longer had our port. But when you visit today, you will find the River Stour, as Bertie mentioned, but not the great body of water that it once was. Instead, the beautiful river that we know today.
In its heyday, Sandwich is said to have been the second most prominent port town in the country after London. There may be many people who have not heard of our little town, but in those days, well, the many monarchs that passed through had certainly heard of it, and Edward, the first Earl, must have as well before he borrowed its name. In its early beginnings, though, long before the Earl was walking around, those referring to the town were not calling it Sandwich. In 664, the first written mention of the town that we know of was recorded when Wilfrid, Bishop of Northumberland, on returning from his consecration in France, wrote that he landed happily and pleasantly at Sandwic. Instead, when writing the name of the time, they left out the H. If we split the word in two and ignore the sand part, we're left with W-I-C, pronounced wick. You will still find many wicks in our modern-day place names, and even some that have been lost, like Londonwich, which was an area of Anglo-Saxon London. It is suggested that the word witch refers to a dairy farm. However, it could also mean village, dwelling place, or trading place. What we get then, if we add the sand part back onto the witch, is a settlement of sandy soil. That is exactly what Sandwich was.
Now that we know the history of our town, I wanted to next educate you all on who or what the Earl of Sandwich was. Let's take it from 1625, the year that the very first Earl of Sandwich was born. We're rewinding the clocks to almost 400 years from today. And before I mention the Earls, I wanted to give a brief history lesson on what was happening in the country at this time. In the spring of that year, Charles I took the throne, being crowned a year later. His father, James I, who was also James VI of Scotland, had succeeded Elizabeth I, bringing about the Stuart period. When it came to ruling, Charles I took a leaf out of his father's book. They both believed a king could only be punished by God, a belief known as the divine rights of kings. Charles I was an impatient ruler at times, and the public were increasingly getting fed up. Now, Charles I would often not allow Parliament to sit and hold sessions. This meant when he was trying to pass any laws and cause any taxations, he would close down Parliament, and it caused a huge tensions between the Parliament and the monarch. As a result, we have Oliver Cromwell popping into the scene here. The English Civil War occurred as a result of Charles I not allowing Parliament to sit for such an extended period of time. In the English Civil War, we had the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. The Roundheads were those who supported Parliament and supported Oliver Cromwell. They wanted to limit the king's power and so that the country was run more equally and more for the people. The Cavaliers, on the other hand, supported King Charles I and supported his vision of absolute monarchy. This meant that the monarch would have the absolute power to rule how he wished to rule and did not need Parliament or another government or legislative body to agree upon any of his taxations or laws. The English Civil War ended with King Charles I being beheaded. Oliver Cromwell and the Parliament took over the reign of England in what was known as the interregnum period. This is the time between the two monarchs. England was ruled under a strict Protestant reign. Famously, Oliver Cromwell is known for banning Christmas, for banning plays, for banning anything that he viewed was against the Lord and took away time for worship to the Lord. However, this period of time did not last forever. In 1660, Charles II returned to England after having fled to France following the beheading of his father. Here, he became the King of England, throwing a restoration of the monarchy, marking the end of the interregnum period. This period of time in England was very unsettled. We had lots of back and forth between political power and power from the monarchy, as well as different religious beliefs. And one thing that we should take into consideration for our episode here at least, is that when Charles II returned, he brought back the fun. He was known as the king of parties. He brought back Christmas, he brought back plays, he brought back sports, and he lived his life as king rather lavishly, including lots of money spent on parties and lots of mistresses alongside his wife Catherine of Braganza. And that was just a quick rundown of the history of the monarchs and the Parliament during the time that the first Earl of Sandwich was born.
Far from the bustling centre of England, in the beautiful village of Barnwell, Northamptonshire, that same year, 1625, a baby was born. His parents, Sir Sidney Montague and Paulina Pepys, named him Edward.
For all the history buffs, yes, Paulina is related to Samuel Pepys, the man remembered for keeping a diary during the 1660s, which has most notably recorded the disasters of the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London. She was his great aunt.
Anyway, Edward Montague is not the main character in our story, but he does play an important role, so let's go on a whistle-stop tour of his life, at least up until he becomes relevant to our story. At the age of 30, Edward became a member of the Admiralty Committee and was later given the rank of General at Sea, the highest position of command in the English Navy at the time. Remember how we discussed Cromwell being in charge? Well, when Parliament decided to reinstate Charles II as king, he was invited to return to England. Edward Montagu was in charge of the fleet that brought Charles II home, having been trusted with the role of assisting the king on his travels home. Edward was offered the title of Earl.
As already said, the first Earl of Sandwich is not the main character of the story, so let's skip ahead a few generations. From old Edward Montagu to the second Earl, named, Edward, to the third Earl, another Edward, before finally landing on, can you guess it? No, not Edward this time, but John. John Montagu, the fourth Earl of Sandwich, and the apparent culprit for the name of one of the most common foods around. John Montagu was born in 1718, and he was the son of the third Earl of Sandwich. He lived his life as the First Lord of the Admiralty during the American Revolution, which, during the latter years of his time as First Lord of Admiralty, he was actually accused of taking bribes and criticized for a few of his decisions during the American Revolution. 2 fun facts about John Montagu during his life. First fun fact, in 1763 he was accused of a man called John Wilkes, who was once John Montagu's former friend. As a result of leading prosecutions which caused John Wilkes to be convicted, John Montagu earned himself the nickname Jemmy Twitcher. Jemmy Twitcher was a character in John Gay's Beggar's Opera. Twitcher was a term used for someone who betrays others, and therefore John Montagu got his nickname for someone who betrays his friends. Another fun fact, which is much more uplifting this one, in 1778, Captain James Cook named the Sandwich Isles in Hawaii after Montagu, due to Montagu's interest in naval exploration. Now, the fact that we want to focus on most here is that John Montagu was a big-time gambler, which, in our story, led to the creation of the sandwich. When John Montagu created the sandwich, 2 pieces of bread and meat in between was named such after his name.
Apparently, he actually wanted the title of Earl of Portsmouth originally, but he wasn't able to have that title and was given the title of Sandwich.
If the first Earl gained the name Earl of Portsmouth, there's a chance that the lunch that you and I have today would be a Portsmouth. Rather than having a ham and cheese sandwich, live in a town sandwich, you'd have a ham and cheese Portsmouth. Which is a little interesting fact, I think, which how small bits in history can, take a change, almost like a butterfly effect.
To burst the bubble on our myth, sandwiches existed prior to John Montagu's inspirational gambling session. In fact, it has been suggested that John Montagu most likely did not come up with the idea of the sandwich on his own. Instead, he probably took inspiration from his travels in the Navy. John Montagu would have seen filled pita breads in countries such as Greece and Turkey, a traditional part of mezes that had predated Montagu's gambling session.
Let's talk about the most key component, the bread. If you try researching the history of bread, you'll find that it's been around for an incredibly long time. Before there could be bread, there needed to be an understanding of how to create it. For that, people needed some kind of grain, and of course, a method of cooking it. Research suggests that around 1 million years ago is when humans developed an understanding of how to control fire. So, there's the cooking method sorted at least. Originally, bread was probably unleavened. This meant that it did not contain a leavening agent, which produces carbon dioxide during fermentation, and it causes the bread to rise. The leavening agent that we usually hear about today is yeast. So the bread at the time probably would have been similar to more of like a flat bread or tortilla wrap that we know today, rather than your standard loaf of bread. Archaeological evidence of yeast used for bread, but also possibly ale, has been found in Egypt from as early as 4000 BC. This is usually the date given for when the discovery of leavened bread took place. So the concept of bread happened many years before John Montagu's tale of the sandwich. Originally, the oldest evidence of any type of bread dates from around 9,000 years ago, and it was found in Turkey. However, in 2018, it was reported that scientists had discovered an even older evidence, around 5,000 years older than that. In the Black Desert in Jordan, an archaeological dig site, Dr. Aran from the University of Copenhagen discovered the remains of bread. The bread samples were studied and found to demonstrate that the ingredients had been grinded, sieved, and kneaded. Professor Dorian Fuller of the University College London said, and I quote, "They've got flatbread and they've got roasted gazelle and so forth, and that's something they are then using to make a meal." These samples are from a site that is 14,000 years old. meaning that this discovery is now the oldest known evidence of bread making, and as they possibly wrapped roasted meat with the bread, it's likely that this is actually the oldest version of a sandwich.
Literary references to sandwiches in English start in the 1760s, so around the same time or just after John Montagu.
I want to add this as well. The story that we have about the Earl actually comes from a particular piece of writing by Pierre Grosley, who lived in London in 1765 and wrote about his time there, as well as the event that we've been exploring. The text has been translated into English, and the quote of it is, "A minister of state spent 24 hours at a gaming house, always absorbed to such an extent that, during those 24 hours, he only lived on some slices of grilled beef, that he got served between 2 slices of toast, and that he ate without quitting the game. This new dish grew in favour. It was named after the minister who invented it, to save time." Also, the English historian Edward Gibbon wrote in 1762, "Supping at little tables upon a bit of cold meat, or a sandwich." So that is where this account of the tale of Sandwich comes from. This is where we get what we are exploring in today's episode. Versions of this story claim that the Earl more likely used food to remain at his desk as he worked very long hours, rather than the gambling event that we have been made to believe so far. Either way though, other versions do not dispute that he popularised the name. As we have said, it is likely that John Montagu saw versions of sandwich on his travels, especially as we now know that they were being consumed in other countries, long before he was even born, many centuries before he was born.
Sandwiches were eaten for different reasons at different times. Originally eaten by men during late-night drinking parties, and because of that were originally something for the upper class. However, by the end of the 18th century, it went down to general society as supper food. By the 19th century, it moved to midday dinner to later in the day as a result of the Industrial Revolution and longer working days. Sandwiches became the go-to for light meals used by the working class, becoming what we know today.
I want to share some facts of different types of sandwiches and their creation. Apparently, the first mention of the word sandwich in a recipe book was in The Lady's Assistance for Regulating and Supplying the Table by Charlotte Mason, which was published in London in the late 18th century. And in 1837, one of the first recipes for a sandwich was published in the cookbook, Miss Leslie's Directions for Cookery. The recipe was for a ham sandwich.
It's honestly surprising because I would have thought sandwiches would have been mentioned earlier. It seems to be a very simple food.
It is a very simple food, and it's been around at this point for hundreds of years. So you think that it should have been written down prior to this, but...
Also, I do find the idea of a recipe for a sandwich rather amusing. Like, unless it's detailing how to cut the ham and make the bread.
How long do you think the recipe is going to be? You know,
I think it's a bit overkill.
It's going to be pages long, I'm quite sure. Also, as a sandwich resident, there's something a bit special about having the first recipe of a sandwich being a ham sandwich. Considering we've got here our town sandwich, which next door there's a little area called Ham, and we have a very famous signpost that says Ham Sandwich. Many tourists like it here, and in fact at the Sandwich Guildhall Museum we have a postcard with that sign on it. You should definitely come visit it. It's a spectacular sign, the ham sandwich one. Anyway, many people will have heard of the American invention, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a PB&J. Jelly is American for jam. A physician called Dr. Ambrose Straub invented a peanut paste to help patients who were struggling to swallow. Dr. Kellogg, whose name you probably definitely recognise, mastered the process for making peanut butter, which was introduced in 1893. Dr. Straub's version then also began gaining interest. The butter was only served to very sophisticated people. In 1901, Julia Davis Chandler suggested pairing the butter with currant or crepe apple jelly, a recipe for which was published in a magazine. The ingredients became more affordable, and the snack was popularised during the Second World War by soldiers who were returning home. Eventually, similar to sandwiches, it became popular with people who were on a budget.
I do find that quite interesting because I've always wondered where the idea of peanut butter and jam came from, because it seems like a very odd combination to me.
It does. It's that sandwich that I always heard about in movies and TV shows. And I also find it interesting that, as well as the history of sandwiches, well, PB&J was originally for sophisticated upper class people before it became more affordable and then popularized within the working class and, well, everyone in society. It's interesting that it has the same history there, and it's cool to point out. Staying in America, they also invented the club sandwich. The story is fairly obvious, although it's quite similar to our story of John Montagu, in that it doesn't seem to be confirmed. It's believed that in the 1800s, a chef at the Saratoga Club in New York was asked to create a snack that would be satisfying to the members of the club. He created a sandwich containing turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, and mayo in 3 slices of bread. It was also said that this was actually created in the Union Club in Chicago, but wherever it was created, it caught on mostly due to its convenience. It was quick to make and to serve, and I must say, very delicious.
No, I must say, going on a tangent, this is a personal favourite of mine because I think it's a very good combination.
Yeah, I would agree. I like toasted club sandwich as well. I think it's gorgeous.
Mm.
Corned beef has the majority of its roots in Ireland. In the 17th century, Irish farmers began using salt to cure and preserve meat, with what is meant by the word corned. In the 19th century, Irish people travelled to America, bringing corned beef with them. The Jewish delis in New York were involved in popularising a sandwich containing corned beef.
Oh, I find that quite interesting. I always wondered why it was called corned beef.
Yeah, I didn't know it's about the salting of the meat. Right, last fact now. We've mentioned the alternatives to sandwiches from other countries. Well, there are plenty more wonderful recipes. So I thought, Bertie, that I could run through a couple of options if a ham sandwich is not your first choice. So in Denmark, you have a smørrebrød. Sorry if I mispronounced this. Anyway, Denmark you have smørrebrød, which translates to buttered bread, and it is a traditionally open sandwich. Originally, it would have had fish, such as pickled herring, as well as cucumber, tomato, and boiled egg. Other toppings could have been mayonnaise, meat, or pickles. Herring in a sandwich. Would you have eaten that?
I wouldn't say that's personally my thing, but I can see the appeal because some people really like pickled foods. Some people really go crazy.
Really go crazy.
So I can see why that would appeal.
Yeah, definitely. So in Egypt, you have the hawashi, and it's a spicy sandwich or pita filled with minced beef, pepper, salt, and herbs. Now that sounds delicious. And then you've got your Greek gyros, which is meat cooked on a fertile rotisserie, like a kebab, which is sliced and put into a pita bread with tomatoes, onions, potatoes, and sauce. So, lots of different types of sandwiches here.
I will say that those last 2 you mentioned do sound really nice. I am quite a big fan of a pita bread personally, so I can very much see the appeal for those 2.
Mm-hmm. Right, question here for you, Bertie. When do you think that the pre-packed sandwiches that are sold in supermarkets today were introduced?
I think probably sometime after the Second World War. I think because that was the rise of the chain supermarket happened after that point.
Yeah.
So I presume it was sometime around then.
Well, if you live in the UK, chances are you've encountered a pre-packed sandwiches. We are, after all, quite enthusiastic about our meal deals. You might be surprised that they were apparently invented relatively recently. Pre-packaged sandwiches were first produced by Marks and Spencer's in 1980. The first filling included egg and cress, salmon cucumber, and ham and prawn mayo. They cost, and get ready for this difference is a bit shocking, they cost 43 per sandwich.
That's the dream, isn't it? I feel.
Yeah.
I would say 1980s definitely a lot later than I was anticipating. I was expecting the mid 60s, like sort of by the end of rationing, sort of around then.
Yeah, this is how it happened. So a little production and packaging station was set up in the stockroom. They were so successful, they spread them across several stores within a few weeks. It's not long after the process was industrialized that other supermarkets and cafes began producing similar products. And then we have what is known as our meal deals today in our supermarkets.
No, I do find it interesting how recent that idea is, especially considering how much of a cultural staple things like the meal deal are in this country.
I think every supermarket does it. Like, even I'm pretty sure my own corner store does their own meal deals there now. So thank you, Marks and Spencer's. Though I will not be having egg and cress. What is your personal go-to meal?
Oh, my go-to meal deal. I do quite like a BLT, I will say. I think it's difficult to go wrong with that, to be honest. Sometimes when they have one of those fancy ones, like a chicken tikka sandwich, I'll spring for that sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Chicken tikka, yeah. But what's the whole meal deal? What's your snack and your drink?
Oh, snack and drink. Usually drink probably like a Pepsi Max or something. I usually go for that. The snack can vary. Usually like a packet of crisps or something, probably.
Well, I go my personal meal deal, I go for a kind of the same thing every time. I rarely vary from this. I go for a ham and cheese sandwich. Very classic, very boring, I think, but there's just something about the ham and cheese sandwiches that supermarkets do. So I go for that, and then I go for crisps, usually prawn cocktail flavor. The drink, I'll go for like a fruit squash kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so Marks and Spencer's original egg and cress sandwich to nowadays what I know that's definitely some more out there kind of styles.
I think the big talking point that happened about halfway through this year was the Tesco birthday cake sandwich. I certainly saw that one a lot.
For listeners at home that don't know, Tesco's released this special edition sandwich that was birthday cake. So it had icing in it, it had jam in it, and I think it had sprinkles in it too. So it was a sandwich that tasted like birthday cake, exactly as it was said on the label, I guess.
Some may argue it's a step too far. I feel like the sprinkles sort of pushed over the edge for me, rather.
It was definitely a unique one. There we go. From Sandwic, the Earl of Sandwich, all the way through to Marks and Spencer's in the 1980s. We went into this episode wondering how true the story of John Montagu was. And I think after going through the history, it seems most likely true. Whether that be the gambling story or a man working hard, he, I would say at least, definitely popularized a sandwich. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Bertie. It's been an excellent chat, especially going into the rambles of sandwiches past and also what sandwiches are like today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time here. But before you go, I must ask, Bertie, one last moment here in this incredibly important sandwich episode. Do you have a question of the week for us?
So my question of the week is going to bring us right the way back to the beginning of the episode when you mentioned butterfly effects and how small changes in history could change things that are really common now. So my question is, can you think of any very small changes in history that would lead to massive differences in everyday life or common objects today? It's like if you can think something in the past would change, that would make these massive differences now.
Oh, that's such a good question. On the spot, I think I will have to say, okay, Isaac Newton. He said gravity came because the apple hit him on the head. What if the apple just didn't fall off the tree at that time? Would his theories of, I have not looked into the history of science. It confuses me personally. So I assume his theories of gravity were not just because an apple hit him on the head. However, would we have the knowledge that we have today of science? Would we be as far advanced maybe if the apple hadn't hit him in the head? Don't know. What do you think, Bertie?
Oh, I don't know. It's difficult to say because on the top there are so many tiny things in history that you probably wouldn't even think of. There's such huge ramifications today. I just know there's just so many to think about.
Right, guys, definitely join our Discord here and get in touch. I want to know what you're thinking of as well. If you guys are thinking of something, if you know some really obscure bit of history that you know of, this small tiny thing never happened and this whole big event wouldn't have happened. I love those sort of conversations. So definitely get involved. Thank you, Bertie. That's an excellent question of the week for us. Thank you, Bertie. And before we say completely goodbyes, I'll do one last goodbye outro to remind you of where to contact us. But for now, goodbye, Bertie.
Goodbye.
We just wanted to give a quick reminder to email us any feedback, comments, or interesting facts that you know or discover in relation to the topics discussed in today's episode. Just email us at loavestollegends@gmail.com or join our Discord server and be a part of our online Loaves to Legends community. The email and Discord link will be in the episode description, as well as on our website, sandwichguildhallmuseum.co.uk. With every episode, we'll be asking a question of the week on our Discord server. This week's question is, can you think of any very small changes in history that would lead to massive differences in everyday life or common objects today? Join our Discord and have a discussion with us and other listeners and find out what our answers at the Loaves to Legends team are. But for now, goodbye from us, Gia and Bertie. We have been Loaves to Legends, the history-based podcast from Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Thank you for listening and we'll speak again soon. Loaves to Legends is produced by Sandwich Guildhall Museum. Millie and Gia are the executive producers. Today's episode was researched and written by Millie and Gia, and edited by Millie. Gia and Bertie were your hosts today. Special thanks to Ian Pittaway for his permission to use his translation of the music, and to Kat Patchler for performing it. Finally, thank you to Beth Stone for the episode artwork.